Hello, everyone, and welcome to our event. My name is Elizabeth Evans, Manager of Research and Consultation here at Grant's office. Today, we will be discussing the Indiana Secured School Safety Grant Program, or SSSG, which offers $27.1 million each year to Indiana school corporations, accredited non-public or private schools, charter schools, and consortia of school corporations. The folks here at Grant's office are really excited about today's session. At this point, we've done a few within this series of webinars, each one focusing on a specific grant program. So as you may know, if you've watched some of these already, we do dozens of events throughout the year on grant seeking advice in general as well. How to position your organization broadly for transportation funding, or cybersecurity funding, or even school safety funding. Our purpose with this new 2026 series is to get far more granular on our information and our grant-seeking advice, focusing a full 30 to 45 minutes on just one grant program that is relevant for this time of year. So we very much hope that you like today's event, and I encourage those of you in the audience who are representing an Indiana school today to consider who else among your peers may benefit from today's session and pass this recording along to them. As Sam will detail in a few moments, this is a competitive grant program that we are talking about. So the more folks who can learn about the grant and secure funding for Indiana schools, all the better. But before we get started, I've got two housekeeping items for you. First, you may ask questions at any time during today's event using the question and answer interface on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to submit as many questions as you'd like, and we'll get to as many as possible towards the end of today's presentation. And then second, also know that this session is being recorded. The recording is going to be available for download at the Grant's office website starting tomorrow. Our webcast producer, Kate, has shared the link in the chat already. It's pointing to this event registration at the moment, but will transition to become a resources page for the event once we begin the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Also, the PowerPoint slides presented here today, along with a free step-by-step application workbook for the grant, will be available at the same location. So we'll talk more about that workbook in a bit. Again, today we are talking about the Indiana Secured School Safety Grant Program, and I'm joined by Sam Rawdon, our in-house expert on this grant. Sam has helped dozens of organizations just like yours to navigate the ins and outs of the SSSG. I personally have had the joy of joining him on some of those calls, and I can attest he is so very knowledgeable, particularly when it comes to school safety initiatives. He is committed to getting Indiana schools across the finish line with this challenging grant program. And so in short, he's got a wealth of grants expertise on this grant, and I think you guys are really going to learn a lot from him today. Now, here is a quick run through of our agenda for today over the next 30 minutes or so. Once I pass things over to Sam, he'll run through a high-level introduction of the Indiana Secured School Grant Program, detailing what is it, what does it help you pay for, who can go after it, that kind of stuff. We want to make sure before we dive into the nitty-gritty details that this is the right grant for you and that this webinar is worth your time. After we've cleared those hurdles, Sam has a load of information on how to prepare a competitive SSSG proposal. He'll talk about the different elements of a successful project, deadlines you're going to want to keep in mind, and so much more. And then we'll end with a quick overview of some of the additional services that Grant's office can provide you around this grant program, whether you need someone to come in and review the draft of the proposal you're writing, or maybe you want someone to put pen to paper on your behalf and actually write the narrative. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to the very capable hands of Sam to get us started. Sam?
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. So with a clear roadmap of what is to be covered today, let us start by grounding ourselves into what the Indiana Secured School Safety Grant Program actually is. So this program was established in 2013 as a state-funded initiative, and since then it has awarded over 187 million to schools across Indiana. So this is not a new or experimental program. It is a well-established funding source with a strong track record. At its core, the purpose of this program is pretty straightforward, and that is to help schools address safety threats and improve overall security through targeted and evidence-based investments. About the important word here is targeted. This is not a general purpose safety grant. The state of Indiana is expecting applicants to clearly identify specific risks and then propose solutions that directly address those risks. Now, funding can support a range of initiatives from hiring school resource officers to purchasing safety technology, to implement active event warning systems, and even launching student safety and mental health programs. Now, in terms of eligibility, this grant is open, as Elizabeth said earlier, to Indiana school corporations, charter schools, accredited non-public schools, and even a consortia of schools working together. Looking ahead to the upcoming cycle, as Elizabeth said, there is going to be about 27.1 million available in funding, with individual awards typically ranging from 35,000 up to 100,000, depending on your size and match. So overall, this is a highly accessible and impactful funding opportunity, but it does come with specific requirements, which we will walk through today. So to better understand how you can apply, let's break the program down into its four primary funding categories. And these categories really define how your project will be structured and evaluated. First, we have threat assessment and prevention programs, which focuses on identifying and addressing risks before they escalate. Second is safety training, which includes everything from staff preparedness to coordinated emergency response training. Third is safety equipment and technology, which often is the most popular category and includes things like cameras, access control, as well as communication systems. And then finally, school resource officers or law enforcement presence, which supports personnel and partnerships with law enforcement agencies. Most strong applications clearly fit into one or more of these categories. And then really more importantly, they don't really try to do everything at once, but rather they try to stay as focused as possible within the categories. So let's take this a step further and look at what is eligible within these categories. Under equipment and technology, you are looking at things like surveillance systems, visitor management, radios, really the core infrastructure of school safety. There's also funding for site vulnerability assessments and critical incident digital mapping, which are incredibly important because they directly inform your planning and response. Active event warning systems like panic buttons or alert systems are also eligible, as well as physical design and construction projects. So think of things like secure vestibules. On the training side, you can fund things like active shooter response, de-escalation, and emergency drills. For prevention, there's support for student and parent services, bullying prevention, as well as post-incident counseling. And then for law enforcement, funding can go toward SROs or even K-9 units. But ultimately, the key takeaway here is that this program supports a comprehensive approach. But your application should still be strategic and clearly justified. So one of the most important aspects of this grant is the matching requirement. Your required match is based on your average daily membership or ADM, which essentially reflects your student population size. So for smaller schools, those under 5,000 or 500 students, I should say, you may only need the 25% match for smaller awards, which makes this very accessible. Mid-sized schools typically fall into the 50% match range, and then larger schools or districts, those over 1,000 students, are generally looking at a 100% match. Now, that might sound like a barrier, but it's important to think of this as a partnership. The state of Indiana is investing in your project, but they want to see that you're also committed financially. So strong applications not only meet the match, but they also clearly explain where that match is coming from and how it will be sustained. So to make this a little more concrete, let's just take a look at a few examples on how the match works. So take a small rural school with about 400 students. They might want to install cameras, which will cost ultimately around 35,000. With a 25% match, they would receive about 26,000 in funding and contribute around 8,700. A mid-sized school with 850 students, say, might want to hire a part-time SRO for $50,000. With that 50% match, that essentially makes it a 50-50 split. And then a large district or even a coalition of schools could pursue a much larger project, say $200,000 with a full 100% match. So what these examples are showing is that the program will scale with your size, but also that planning for this cost match is going to be critical early on. All right, so now we're shifting a little bit into eligibility, and this is where a lot of applications are going to succeed or sort of fall flat here. So first, your school must be in a county with an active county school safety commission. These commissions typically include law enforcement, school leaders, community stakeholders, and they're ultimately responsible for reviewing safety plans, coordinating response protocols, and also assessing threats. Now, if your county does not have an active commission, you are not eligible to apply. So this is something that should be confirmed early on. But if you are unsure whether your county has a commission, there are a few indicators. You may already be participating in regular safety meetings with law enforcement, or there may be a formal safety committee already in place. But if you're still not sure, I would recommend the best step is going to be to contact your local law enforcement agency or your county officials directly, because this is not something that you will want to leave unresolved as applications open. Another critical requirement is going to be the Mental Health Memorandum of Understanding, or the MOU. You must have a signed agreement with a licensed mental health provider, and this agreement has to include direct services to students. This is not optional. And it must be certified by the state before you apply. So examples include school-based therapists, telehealth services, crisis response partnerships, as well as targeted behavioral support. But ultimately, the key here is that services have to be active and student-facing rather than just a referral relationship. And that here you're going to see the most typical eligible mental or behavioral health services. Keep in mind that you are allowed to have multiple agreements in place with different mental or behavioral health providers, as long as they are properly licensed and certified. Schools, they typically utilize multiple partners to ensure that full spectrum of care for their students. So you are not limited to only one partnership with an eligible provider. So, for example, one provider could be for, say, on-site counselors, while another could be for specialized crisis intervention or telehealth services. So the third major requirement is your site vulnerability assessment. Every school building must have a formal assessment, and like the MOU, it must be certified by the state. This assessment should cover everything from physical security and access control to communication systems, emergency response capacity, and so on. It also needs to identify specific vulnerabilities and as well as to include a corrective action plan. This is incredibly important because your entire application should be built around this document. If your proposal is not clearly tied to identified risks in your assessment, it's not going to be as competitive. So you'll want to keep that in mind. And then here, you'll see the requirements of a site vulnerability assessment, which covers 7 key areas. These are including things like exterior vulnerabilities, internal classroom security, surveillance functionality, and even pedestrian traffic management. The process concludes with a written report that maps those identified risks to any prioritized mitigation strategies, which ultimately will ensure alignment with state standards. The one important thing to keep in mind is that passing the state certification will signify that a school's safety assessment meets those rigorous state standards, which ensures that all major security domains are reviewed, as well as those vulnerabilities being clearly documented. The process also validates that the findings of the site vulnerability assessment are actionable, they follow a consistent methodology, and that the report is formally submitted and approved prior to the application. So again, shifting gears, let's move on to what will be needed to make an application as competitive as possible. So before you even begin drafting your application, you'll need to make sure that your registrations are fully in place. And I want to emphasize this because this is one of the most common early barriers that we see. Now, there are 2 key systems that you'll need to be set up in. The first is IntelliGrants, which is the state of Indiana's grants management system. This is where your entire application will live, from submission to award management and reporting. If your organization is not registered in IntelliGrants, you will not even be able to access the application. So this is step 1. Now, registration itself is not always instant. It can involve setting up your organization profile, assigning user roles and permissions, as well as verifying organizational details like EIN and contact information. In some cases, especially if multiple people need access, like say a superintendent, a financial officer, or even a grant writer, you'll want to coordinate that early on so that there are no bottlenecks later on. And the second requirement is your state bidder and supplier registration. Essentially, what this means is that your organization is approved to do business with the state of Indiana and receive funds. Even though this is a grant and it's not a contract, the state still requires you to be registered as a supplier in their procurement system. Now, the step often trips people up because organizations assume that they're already registered, but their status might be inactive, or their registration exists, but certain key information is outdated, or the person who originally registered the organization is no longer with the district. So it's important to log in and confirm that your status is active, verify that your banking and contact information is current, and to make sure that the right personnel have access to it. Another key point here with these two systems is that they do not operate in isolation. Your organization name, contact details, and identifiers have to be consistent across both IntelliGrants and the supplier system. Any mismatch can slow down any approvals or even delay funding if you are awarded. From a timing standpoint, I recommend treating registration as a pre-application step. Ideally, this is something that you confirm before you start writing, before you gather documentation, and very well before the application deadline, because the last thing that you'll want is to have a fully developed and competitive proposal and then realize that you can't submit it due to a registration issue. So the bottom line here is simple. Don't assume that you're registered. Don't assume that your status is active. And don't wait until the application opens to check. Take a few minutes now early to confirm that everything is in place, because this is one of the easiest problems to fix early on, but at the same time, it's also one of the hardest problems to fix late. Once your registrations are all squared away, and at this stage in the process, your focus should really shift to gathering and confirming all the required documentation, because these are not items that you can pull together at the last minute. So there are three core components that you'll need in place before you can even submit a complete application. First is going to be your state certified site vulnerability assessment. This needs to be finalized, submitted, and officially certified, not as a draft, but official, right? The final draft. And remember that this document is going to drive your entire proposal. So you should not only have it on hand, but also fully understand its findings and its recommendations. Second is going to be your mental health MOU. This must be signed and active, as mentioned earlier, with a qualified provider, and it must clearly outline how services are being delivered directly to students. If your agreement is outdated, unsigned, or even too vague, it can delay or even fully disqualify the application. So it is worth reviewing carefully. And then third, you need confirmation that your county has an active county school safety commission. In some cases, you may be asked to verify participation. So it is a good idea to have a point of contact on the commission or any documentation ready if the state asks for it. But what is important to understand about these three certifications is that they are not just check the box requirements. They're actually and essentially eligibility gatekeepers. If one of these is missing or incomplete or not certified, the application might not move forward to review. So from a timing perspective, the most successful applicants typically treat this step as an early milestone instead of a last minute task. Ideally, you'll want all this documentation confirmed, current, and readily accessible before you begin finalizing your narrative and your budget. Because really, once those pieces are in place, the rest of your application process becomes much smoother and much more focused. So I'd like to spend some time on what truly separates a fundable application from one that gets passed over, because this is where strategy is really going to matter. So first, and probably the most important part, is that everything in your application must tie directly back to the site vulnerability assessment. Reviewers are not looking for general safety concerns or broad statements like "we want to improve school security." They are specifically looking for a clear line of sight between a documented vulnerability and a proposed solution. So for example, instead of saying "we need additional cameras," a strong application would say something like, our site vulnerability assessment identified 3 unmonitored entry points along the east corridor and a lack of exterior coverage near the bus loading zone, creating blind spots during arrival and dismissal. To address this, the district will install 12 IP-based surveillance cameras with centralized monitoring to eliminate these gaps. Now, that level of specificity shows reviewers that your project is not just a wish list, but rather it is a direct response to a validated risk. Second, your goals and objectives need to be SMART, if you've heard of that acronym before, but not only SMART, but also aligned to the program's priorities. It's not enough to say, "we will improve safety." You need to define what will improve, by how much it's going to improve, and how it's going to be measured. So, for example, instead of "improve emergency response," say, "reduce emergency response notification time from 2 minutes to under 30 seconds through implementation of a district-wide active event warning system integrated with local law enforcement." Or another example is train 100% of staff in trauma-informed de-escalation techniques and conduct 2 full-scale coordinated drills with local first responders within the grant period. Again, reviewers are looking for measurable improvements, specifically in prevention, response, or recovery. So your objectives should clearly reflect that. Third, your implementation plan needs to demonstrate that you can realistically execute the project within the grant performance period. A common mistake is being too vague here. Strong applications break the project into phases. So for example, months 1 and 2 are for finalizing vendor contracts and procurement approvals. Months 3, 4, and 5 are for installing equipment or onboarding service providers. Months 6, 7, and 8 are for conducting staff training and system integration. And finally, months 9, 10, 11, 12 can be for measuring effectiveness. Again, this level of detail reassures reviewers that you understand what it takes to implement the project, you've planned for potential delays, and you're ready to move quickly once funded. And then finally, your budget must be tightly aligned with your narrative, as well as reflect real current costs. A lot of applications lose points here. So make sure that every item in your budget should make sure it clearly connects to a vulnerability, it matches a described activity in your plan, and falls within an eligible funding category that I highlighted earlier. So for example, if you're requesting funding for, say, an SRO, your budget should include salary, fringe, and any related costs. And then your narrative should explain deployment, role, and impact as well. Or if you're requesting technology, include the number of units, the cost per unit, installation costs, and any associated software or maintenance. But most importantly, use actual vendor quotes if possible. This shows cost reasonableness, project readiness, and really is that you've already done that groundwork. As Elizabeth said in the beginning, this is a competitive program, and reviewers are more likely to fund projects that look ready to implement rather than those ones that are still conceptual in nature. So to truly maximize the competitiveness of your application, focus on demonstrating deep partnerships, focus on financial readiness, as well as focusing on high quality outcomes. So to have meaningful stakeholder support, move beyond those standard endorsements by including role-specific letters of support that detail each partner's actual operational role. So, for example, specify how local law enforcement integrates into your SRO coverage, or how the school board will maintain funding over time. These unique and non-template letters are going to prove that your safety plans are resourced and collaborative rather than isolated efforts. For strategic match funding, provide clear documentation of how you are going to meet the required local match. So again, ranging from 25% to 100% based on ADM. A strong proposal is going to outline a multi-year strategy, identifying whether funds come from local budgets or partner contributions, and this is to ensure the project's long-term fiscal viability. And then finally, for a performance-driven review, conduct an independent review of your application to ensure that it aligns strictly with the scoring criteria and the specific needs identified in the site vulnerability assessment. This step is really going to help your application so that it doesn't just meet compliance requirements, but it is actually strategically positioned to earn the highest possible scores for impacted clarity. So to help with all of this, we've developed a free eligibility and proposal workbook for this program, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier. This is a great tool to organize your ideas, to outline your project, and even start drafting your narrative. So if you have not done so already, we strongly encourage you to scan the QR code to download and start working through it. And with that, I'm tossing things back over to Elizabeth to talk about Grants Office and how we can help. Elizabeth?
Great. Thank you so much, Sam, for that excellent information. I'm going to give you a few moments to grab a glass of water before we start our Q&A session. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, please look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to drop those questions into the chat box. We'll get to them momentarily. But first off, I wanted to call attention to the number of folks who have reached out to us in the last several months trying to understand what is happening with the U.S. federal budget. While state budgets and foundation budgets have remained relatively stable and reliable forms of funding, we've seen quite a lot of discourse surrounding how and when the U.S. federal government provides grants. There's a lot of conflicting information coming out from the White House, Congress, cabinet members, federal agency heads, and other representatives, and it can be incredibly challenging to keep track of all of that. So if you haven't already done so, I do encourage you to check out our website under the Guidance for Grant Seekers tab, where we have a series of 5-minute videos on the U.S. federal budget. What has passed? What hasn't passed? Which at this point is nothing because we got a DHS budget quite recently. How much funding is available? What changes are we seeing in the grant funding landscape, etc. All of these videos are available for you on demand and are completely free on our website right now. I also want to call out Grants Office's grant writing and editing services that I referred to at the beginning of today's event. Our team here, filled with folks just like Sam, has over 25 years of experience and a strong reputation across both the U.S. and Canada in proposal development work. We help organizations just like yours to plan out and then articulate their projects in a way that's really going to speak to the funder's goals and objectives. So if you're following along with today's session and you do a plan to apply to the SSSG grant, but feel like you're going to need assistance to help you get across that finish line, please reach out. We offer full proposal development and writing. What this means for SSSG is that you can come to us with a completed application workbook, like Sam highlighted earlier, and we'll get you aligned to a grant writer who can translate all of those ideas into a compelling narrative that you can then submit to the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. And if you're writing a proposal yourself, but would like an extra set of eyes on your draft, making sure you've dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's, we do offer proposal editing services at 25% the cost of full grant writing support. So, what does working with Grants Office look like? Well, if you're interested in exploring our support, the first step is to contact us at grantwriting@grantsoffice.com. You'll want to come to that email having already read and worked through most of the questions in the workbook that Sam mentioned earlier. You don't need to have full sentences or beautiful prose for all of the prompts, but we do ask that you've given each component of your project a good deal of thought. From there, you're going to meet with folks like Sam to discuss your project goals and your development needs. If you contract with us for writing, we'll get you connected with a writer who will then start putting that pen to paper on your behalf. We always do try to give you at least 2 opportunities to review those drafts and provide feedback, just because we want to make sure we've captured your organization's goals, vision, and mission for those funds correctly. And as you work towards the SSSG deadline, we'll give you all the application materials so you can upload them into the portal and click submit. So again, if this is something you're interested in, please reach out to us at grantwriting@grantsoffice.com to get started. Now, if you followed along today and you're stuck it through even though you don't think SSSG is right for you, I want to call your attention to other Grants Office services that are available. We do offer funder prospecting research and consultation services that allow you to sit down with a consultant, discuss your upcoming projects, and then be provided a list of state, federal, and even foundation grants that would best support those initiatives. We also have project building services that again allow you to sit down with a consultant like Sam to build out a competitive application to an entirely different grant program. And last but certainly not least, we do have our subscription service, Grants Office Communities, which gives you access to our database of more than 26,000 state, federal, and foundation grants so that you can do the research, project building, all on your own inside a singular platform that was designed for and designed by grants people. Grants Office Communities is always offering a free 2-week trial, so if you haven't gone over to check that out yet, I definitely encourage you to do so. Okay. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, hopefully Sam's had a chance to catch his breath, and it's time for questions. So to begin, Sam, I see a few already in the queue for us to answer. And the first question is that you mentioned that a formal site vulnerability assessment is mandatory and must be certified by IDHS before they can apply. Since we have to pay a vendor to conduct this assessment now to be ready for the deadline, can we include the cost of that specific assessment as a line item in our budget to get reimbursed?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's a great catch. So while a certified assessment is required to essentially unlock your eligibility, the site vulnerability assessment itself is listed as an eligible expense under multiple funding categories, which could be safety training or even safety equipment and technology. However, because the program is not typically, they don't fund retroactive costs or costs incurred before the grant period starts, you generally cannot use grant funds to pay for an assessment that was used to prepare the current or upcoming application, but rather a lot of schools use this grant to fund either a new or even an updated assessment for, say, a different building or a follow-up critical incident digital mapping project during the actual grant performance period.
Wow. Thank you, Sam. That is really, really helpful information to what might seem at times kind of like a gotcha moment for applicants. So thank you for clarifying that. All right, second question for you. We already have a contract with a private telehealth company for student counseling. Does this meet the mental health MOU requirement, or does this specifically have to be a local community mental health center?
Yeah, that's another great question, Elizabeth. So a contract with a state licensed provider for telehealth services is an eligible provider. However, what you'll want to keep in mind is that just having the contract is not going to be enough for the application. The state requires that you must have a signed MOU specifically providing mental or behavioral health services directly to the students, and that MOU has to be certified by IDHS or the state before you submit the application.
All right, awesome. Thank you for that clarity, Sam. All right, last question, unless anybody wants to submit any others, final call. Last question is, if 3 small rural schools with 300 some students each applied together as a coalition, so we're looking at about 900 students, do we still qualify for the 25% match rate for small schools, or are we bumped into that different higher bracket?
Yes. Again, another really good question, and I'm glad this came up. Cost matches can typically trip people up sometimes, but this is a very unique and really a great question. So applying as a coalition is going to change your match tier. So while an individual school with, say, 300 or so students can qualify for a 25% match with the maximum $35,000 award. Again, the coalition of schools, regardless of individual school size, is going to automatically be categorized in that highest tier of cost matches. So while this will allow you, though, to apply for a higher award amount, so again, up to 100,000. Just again, you'll want to keep in mind that's going to require that 100% local match, regardless of the individual or the combined, I should say, ADM.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. So it looks like we haven't received any other questions in the chat. So in terms of our conversations today, I think that just about wraps it up. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you do have any questions that pop up later that weren't answered during today's event, please do feel free to email us at grantwriting@grantsoffice.com. And as always, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you found it a valuable use of your time. Take care, everyone.